It started like most things do these days, online, a chance connection amidst the sea of profiles and statuses. Her name was Anna, or at least that's what her profile said. Her picture wasn't flashy. It wasn't one of those overly filtered, perfectly posed shots. It was natural, just a girl sitting by a window with soft light spilling over her. She had this quiet smile, one that seemed like she'd seen a lot, but wasn't in a rush to talk about it. We started chatting, and it felt easy, which is rare for me. I'm not the kind of guy who usually gets lucky with stuff like this. But Anna, she was different. She asked me questions about my life, my job, my dumb hobbies. She made me feel like I wasn't just some guy filling time on his phone at night. Over the weeks, our conversations became a nightly ritual. It wasn't long before I found myself thinking about her during the day, what she was doing, what she might be thinking. I caught myself checking my phone obsessively for her messages. And then, something strange happened. It started small, like an itch you can't quite reach. At first, it was just a feeling, that odd sense of being watched. I brushed it off. I live in the city, after all. There's always someone on the street, always someone nearby. But it kept happening. Walking to the corner store, heading home from work, I'd glance over my shoulder and catch a figure. Always distant, always just enough to make me second-guess myself. He was tall, thin, and dressed in dark clothes. A baseball cap pulled low over his face made it hard to get a good look at him. Every time I noticed him, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A random stranger heading in the same direction. That's normal, right? But when you notice the same person 2, 3, 4 times in different parts of the city, it stops feeling normal. I didn't say anything to Anna about it. Honestly, I didn't tell anyone. Felt embarrassing. Like admitting I was scared would make it worse somehow. Then, one night, Anna brought up the idea of meeting in person. I won't lie, I was thrilled. We'd been talking for months at this point, and it felt like the natural next step. She suggested a quiet spot, a little diner on the edge of town. I agreed immediately, not even thinking twice about it. But as soon as I hit send, a chill crept up my spine. I could have sworn I saw movement outside my window, a shadow darting just out of sight. I told myself it was just my imagination. It had to be, right? The day of the meeting couldn't come fast enough. But the anticipation was mixed with unease I couldn't shake. I hadn't seen the shadowy figure in days, but I felt exposed, like there were eyes on me every time I stepped outside. I arrived at the diner 20 minutes early. It was a small, old-fashioned place with neon signs buzzing faintly in the windows. Inside, there were vinyl booths, a long counter lined with bar stools, and a waitress who looked like she had been working there since the place opened. The parking lot was empty except for my car and a beat-up old truck parked way in the back. Its windows so dusty you couldn't see inside. It made me nervous, but I told myself it was probably just a local who had walked off somewhere. Anna hadn't shown up yet. I slid into a booth near the window and checked my phone. No new messages from her. But we had agreed on the time and place. She'd be here. The minutes crawled by. The waitress came over, and I ordered a coffee just to have something to do with my hands. I kept glancing at the clock on the wall. 5 minutes late. 10. 15. A little voice in the back of my head started whispering doubts. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she wasn't who she said she was. Maybe. The bell over the door jingled, and my heart leapt. But it wasn't Anna. It was him. The man I'd been seeing everywhere. The one I'd convinced myself was just a coincidence. Just my imagination. He walked in like he owned the place, wearing the same dark clothes and baseball cap. He didn't look around. He didn't hesitate. He just walked straight to my booth and slid into the seat across from me. Up close, he was wrong. His skin was pale, almost gray, and stretched tight over his sharp features. His eyes were deep-set and shadowed, like he hadn't slept in years. And there was the smell, faint but sour, like something rotting. "You've been waiting for Anna," he said, his voice low and scratchy, like gravel sliding underfoot. Every hair on my body stood on end. I opened my mouth to say something, to demand who he was and what he was doing here, but no sound came out. "Come with me," he said. "I'll take you to her." I finally found my voice. "Who the hell are you?" He didn't answer. He just smiled. and it was the most chilling thing I'd ever seen. Too wide. His teeth yellowed and jagged. "Anna's waiting," he said again, and this time he stood up, nodding toward the door. I should have said no. I should have run. But the way he said it, the way he looked at me, made me feel like I didn't have a choice. I followed him. He led me out of the diner and into the parking lot. The air outside was cold and heavy, and the only sound was the distant hum of the diner's neon sign. I hesitated by my car, ready to tell him I wasn't going anywhere with him. But before I could say anything, he pointed to the old truck parked in the back. "In there," he said, his voice flat and commanding. I froze. "No way. I'm not getting in that truck." He turned to face me then, and his smile vanished. His eyes seemed darker now, almost black, and there was something in his expression that made my stomach twist. "You want to see Anna, don't you?" he said softly, almost like a whisper. Something about the way he said her name sent a chill racing down my spine. I looked at the truck, then back at him. My brain was screaming at me to get in my car and drive far, far away, but my feet wouldn't move. Against every ounce of better judgment I had, I walked to the truck. The inside smelled worse than he did. Stale air mixed with mildew and something metallic. The seat was torn, with yellow foam spilling out, and the dashboard was covered in grime. He climbed into the driver's seat without a word, and before I could change my mind, the engine roared to life. We drove in silence, the truck rattling with every bump in the road. At first, I thought we were heading toward the outskirts of town, but soon the streetlights disappeared, and the road turned into dirt. Trees loomed on either side of us, their branches curling overhead like skeletal fingers. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, my voice shaky. "To her," he said simply, his eyes fixed on the road. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my breathing steady. This was insane. I should have called someone, should have done something, but I didn't even know where we were anymore. The road narrowed, the trees pressing in closer, and then he turned onto a barely visible path that disappeared into the woods. The truck bounced and jolted, the headlights cutting through the darkness in jagged streaks. Finally, we came to a stop in front of a small cabin. It was barely standing, its roof sagged, and the wooden walls were covered in moss and rot. There were no lights, no sign of life. "She's in there," he said, his voice calm and cold. I didn't move. "Go," he said, turning to me. His smile was back, and it was worse than before. Every instinct I had screamed that this was wrong, but I couldn't back out now. I opened the door and stepped into the darkness, the cold air biting at my skin. The cabin loomed ahead, its windows black and empty like hollow eyes. I should have turned back. I should have run, but I didn't. The ground was soft and damp beneath my feet, and the forest around me was unnervingly quiet. No rustling leaves, no chirping insects, just the creak of the old cabin in the wind. It felt like the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Behind me, the truck idled, its headlights casting long, warped shadows across the clearing. The man stayed in the driver's seat, watching me with that twisted smile. I forced myself to move. Step by step, I approached the cabin, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Up close, the place looked even worse. The door was slightly ajar, the wood splintered and warped. A foul smell seeped out, damp rot mixed with something acrid and metallic. I hesitated on the threshold. "Anna," I called out, my voice barely louder than a whisper. Nothing, just the wind groaning through the trees. Behind me, the man's voice rang out. "She's waiting. Go on." I stepped inside. The air was heavy and cold, and the smell was overwhelming now, making my stomach churn. The interior was as decrepit as the outside. Broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, and a layer of dust so thick it muffled my footsteps. The only light came from the truck's headlights spilling through the open door, creating jagged shadows that danced across the walls. "Anna," I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. I moved deeper into the cabin, the floorboards creaking ominously under my weight. There was a hallway ahead, narrow and dark. My hand brushed against the wall as I walked, and it came away sticky with something I didn't want to think about. At the end of the hallway, I found a door. It was shut tight, but something about it felt off, like the air around it was heavier. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling. The metal was ice-cold to the touch. I turned it slowly, the door creaking open to reveal a small room. At first, I didn't see anything. The light from the hallway barely reached inside, leaving most of the room in shadow. But then I noticed something in the corner. A shape slumped against the wall. "Anna," I whispered, stepping closer. As I moved into the room, the headlights from the truck flickered and died, plunging the cabin into darkness. I froze, panic surging through me. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, and I fumbled for my phone, desperate for any source of light. When I finally turned it on and shined it toward the corner, the beam caught something. It wasn't Anna. It was a mannequin, or something like one. Its face was blank, smooth plastic, but its body was clothed. A faded dress that looked eerily familiar. The arms and legs were human-like, covered in pale, waxy skin that didn't look quite real. And then its head moved. I stumbled back, my phone slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. That's when I heard the sound behind me. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. I spun around, and there he was, the man standing in the doorway, his silhouette blocking what little light remained. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice soft but heavy with menace. I tried to back away, but my foot caught on something, and I fell hard. My head hit the floor, and for a moment, everything went fuzzy. When my vision cleared, he was standing over me. "You wanted to meet Anna," he said, crouching down so his face was inches from mine. His breath was foul, his eyes glinting with something dark and hungry. "Well," he whispered, "you found her." My breath caught in my throat. His words echoed in my head, cold and mocking. "You found her." I scrambled backward, my hands slipping on the grimy floor, until my back hit the wall. My phone lay a few feet away, its dim light flickering as if it too were afraid. "What are you talking about?" I stammered, my voice shaking. He tilted his head, his grin widening, revealing teeth that didn't seem to belong in a human mouth. "Too many, too sharp. She's here. She's always been here." He stepped closer, the floor creaking under his weight. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I couldn't move, couldn't think. And then I heard it. A sound from behind me, soft but unmistakable. A faint rasp, like someone struggling to breathe. I whipped my head around toward the corner of the room where the mannequin, or whatever it was, still sat slumped. But now its head was turned fully toward me, its blank, featureless face seeming to watch me. "Anna," I choked out, the word barely audible. The rasping grew louder, and the thing began to move. Its limbs jerked awkwardly, like a puppet being dragged on tangled strings. Its head lolled to the side, and its mouth, God, its mouth began to open. A deep, black void where no mouth should be. I screamed. The man lunged toward me, and I reacted without thinking. My hand found the loose floorboard I tripped over earlier, and I yanked it up, swinging it blindly. The wood connected with his arm, and he let out a guttural snarl, more animal than human. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I grabbed my phone and bolted out of the room, down the narrow hallway. The cabin felt alive now, the walls groaning and shifting around me. Shadows danced in my peripheral vision, but I didn't dare look back. I burst through the front door and into the night. The forest was pitch black, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. The truck was still there, its engine running and headlights flickering. I sprinted toward it, throwing myself into the passenger seat and slamming the door behind me. I reached for the key in the ignition, only to realize there wasn't one. The engine was running, but the keys were gone. Panic clawed at my chest. I turned toward the driver's seat, and my stomach dropped. The man was there, sitting calmly behind the wheel, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard. "You can't leave," he said, his voice cold and final. Before I could react, he grabbed my wrist in an iron grip and yanked me out of the truck. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. He dragged me toward the woods, his strength inhuman, unstoppable. You wanted her, he growled, his voice low and guttural. And now you're part of her. I fought, kicked, screamed, but it was no use. The trees closed in around us, their twisted branches reaching down like claws. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed us was the cabin, its windows glowing faintly, like eyes watching me disappear. The forest swallowed us whole. The deeper he dragged me, the darker it became. The air felt heavier with each step, like the weight of the trees was pressing down on me, squeezing the air from my lungs. The only sounds were the crunch of dead leaves beneath his boots and my own ragged breathing. "Let me go!" I shouted, clawing at his grip. His hand was ice-cold and unrelenting, like a steel trap around my wrist. "You don't understand," he muttered, his voice low and strained, almost like he was arguing with himself. "You can't leave. You belong to her now." "Who? Anna?" I gasped, stumbling as he pulled me forward. My legs were weak, my knees buckling, but he didn't stop. "She's part of this place, part of me." His voice cracked, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his expression. Guilt, maybe, fear, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that hollow, chilling smile. The trees grew denser, their branches twisting together overhead like the bars of a cage. The ground beneath my feet became softer, almost spongy, and the smell of damp earth and decay filled my nostrils. And then I saw it. In the center of the clearing ahead was something wrong. It looked like a tree, but it wasn't. Its bark was pale and smooth, almost like flesh, and its twisted branches reached high into the sky, clawing at the darkness. Strange shapes hung from its limbs, tattered fabric, bits of rope, and what looked disturbingly like bones. At the base of the tree was a dark, gaping hollow, wide enough for a person to step inside. "Do you see her now?" the man asked, his voice trembling with a strange mix of awe and dread. "She's waiting for you." I shook my head, my breath coming in shallow gasps. No, this is insane. She's not here. She's not real." He laughed then, a low, rasping sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, she's real. And you brought her here piece by piece. Every message, every thought, every moment you spent thinking about her, you fed her. And now, she's hungry for the rest of you." I yanked hard, finally breaking free of his grip, and stumbled back. "I'm not going in there," I shouted, pointing at the hollow. His smile widened, and his eyes seemed to glint in the dim light. "You don't have a choice." The ground beneath me shifted suddenly, like something was moving just below the surface. I tried to step back, but my feet sank into the soft earth, the muck sucking at my shoes. And then I heard it. A voice, soft, faint, and hauntingly familiar. "Come to me," it whispered, the sound drifting on the wind like a song. My blood ran cold. It was Anna's voice. I spun around, desperate to find the source, but the forest was empty. The voice came again, louder this time, echoing all around me. "Come to me. I've been waiting for you." "No!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "You're not real." The man stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "Go to her. You've already given her everything. What's left of you belongs to her now." Before I could react, the ground gave way beneath me, and I was falling, tumbling into the darkness. The last thing I saw was the man, standing at the edge of the hollow, his face twisted into that horrible smile. And then the blackness closed in around me. When I hit the bottom, it wasn't solid ground that caught me. It was something wet and soft, like a bed of decayed leaves soaked in rain. The air down here was worse, thick, putrid, almost alive. My body ached from the fall, but adrenaline pushed me upright. I fumbled for my phone, the tiny flashlight barely piercing the darkness. What little I could see made my stomach churn. The walls around me were slick and pulsating, like the inside of some living thing. Long, sinewy roots twisted down from above, twitching as if they were watching me. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Come to me." I turned in a frantic circle, shining my light into the black void around me. The voice wasn't coming from one direction. It seemed to echo from everywhere at once, crawling into my ears and burrowing into my mind. "Anna," I called out, my voice trembling. The whisper turned into a laugh, soft and lilting, but with an edge that made my skin crawl. "It's me," the voice purred. "You came all this way for me, didn't you?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry and tight. "Where are you?" The roots began to move, writhing and coiling like snakes. They shifted and parted, revealing a narrow tunnel ahead, its walls slick and glistening. "Come closer," the voice beckoned. I didn't want to move. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn back, to climb out of this place and run until my legs gave out. But there was no way out. The walls behind me had closed, the roots twisting together like a sealed door. I was trapped, so I moved forward, each step heavier than the last. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, the air growing colder and wetter the deeper I went. The light from my phone flickered, threatening to die, but I gripped it tightly, the small beam my only tether to sanity. At the end of the tunnel, I found a room, a cavernous space that shouldn't have existed beneath the earth. The walls were covered in those same fleshy, pulsating roots, and the ground was littered with debris. Bits of fabric, shattered bones, fragments of glass. In the center of the room was a figure. First, I thought it was Anna. She had her shape, her frame, her long dark hair. But something was horribly, horribly wrong. Her skin was pale and stretched too tightly over her bones, and her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes were gone, replaced by deep, empty sockets, and her mouth was too wide, stretched into a smile that split her face. "Do you see me now?" she whispered, her voice dripping with mockery. I stumbled back, my breath hitching in my throat. This isn't real. "You're not real." "Oh, but I am," she cooed, taking a step toward me. Her movements were jerky, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. "You made me real. You made me everything." I shook my head, the light from my phone shaking wildly. No, this isn't. "You gave me your time," she hissed, her voice growing louder. "Your thoughts, your secrets, every message, every moment you gave me you." She lunged then, faster than I could react. Her cold, claw-like hands wrapped around my arms, and her face was inches from mine. Her empty sockets stared into me, and I felt something pulling, something tearing deep inside me. "You're mine now," she whispered, her voice echoing in my skull. I screamed, the sound raw and animalistic, and I lashed out, swinging my phone as hard as I could. The fragile device shattered against her face, and for a brief moment, she let go, staggering backward with an inhuman shriek. I didn't wait. I ran. The tunnel behind me twisted and shifted, but I didn't stop. The roots lashed out, trying to grab me, but I ducked and weaved, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Somehow, I found the opening again, the faintest sliver of light above me. I clawed at the walls, the roots slicing into my hands, but I didn't care. I climbed, dragging myself upward, away from the hollow, away from her. Her voice followed me, growing fainter but no less terrifying. "You can't escape me," she sang, her voice echoing in the dark. "I'll always be with you, always." With one final burst of strength, I pulled myself out of the hole and collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping for air. But the nightmare wasn't over. I lay on the forest floor, gasping for air, the cold night pressing down on me. My hands were slick with blood from the cuts the roots had left, and my head pounded with the sound of her voice, still echoing in my skull. The clearing was empty. The man, the truck, the cabin, they were gone, as if they'd never existed. The forest loomed around me, the trees stretching endlessly in every direction, their twisted branches tangled overhead. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking beneath me. My phone was gone, shattered somewhere in the hollow, and without its light, the darkness felt suffocating. I turned in a slow circle, trying to get my bearings. I couldn't even tell where I'd come from. The trees all looked the same, their blackened trunks gnarled and split. My only choice was to pick a direction and start walking. The forest was silent except for the crunch of leaves under my feet. No wind, no animals, just the oppressive weight of the dark. Every step felt wrong, like I was moving in circles even though I tried to keep a straight line. And then, I started to hear it. At first, it was faint, barely audible over the sound of my own footsteps. A soft, rhythmic noise, like breathing. It wasn't mine. I stopped, holding my breath, and the sound grew louder. It was coming from behind me. I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Nothing, just trees. But the sound didn't stop. It moved, circling me, growing louder and closer. My skin prickled as I realized it wasn't just breathing. It was accompanied by something else. A faint, wet squelching, like something dragging itself through the dirt. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. No answer. I took a step back, and my foot caught on something. I stumbled, falling hard to the ground. My hands landed on something soft and damp, and when I looked down, my stomach turned. It was a shoe. Not just any shoe, my shoe. The one I'd lost back in the hollow. My head snapped up, and that's when I saw them. Shapes moving in the shadows, just at the edge of my vision. They were tall and thin, their bodies bending and twisting in impossible ways. I couldn't make out their faces, but their eyes glowed faintly, like dim embers in the dark. They were watching me. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the adrenaline drowning out every thought except one. Get out. The forest seemed to close in around me as I sprinted, the trees growing thicker, their branches clawing at my clothes and skin. The ground beneath me turned uneven, and I stumbled again and again, but I didn't stop. The breathing was everywhere now, surrounding me, closing in. And then, ahead of me, I saw it. A faint light cutting through the darkness. Hope surged in my chest, and I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs. The light grew brighter, closer, until I could make out its source. It was the cabin. But that was impossible. I had just escaped it. I had climbed out of the hollow and run into the forest. How could I be back here? The door was open, its warped frame creaking in the wind. Inside, the faint glow of a fire flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, this isn't real." But the forest behind me had gone silent, the oppressive stillness pressing against my back like a hand, pushing me forward. I didn't want to go back in, but I didn't have a choice. I stood at the cabin's threshold, the firelight flickering inside, casting shadows that danced across the warped walls. My mind screamed at me not to step in, but my body betrayed me. It felt as though the forest itself was hurting me forward, a cold, invisible force at my back. The door creaked louder as I stepped over the threshold, the air inside thick and humid, clinging to my skin. The smell hit me first, stronger now, a nauseating mix of rot, earth, and something metallic that made my stomach churn. The fire was in the center of the room, but it wasn't a normal fire. Its flames didn't burn orange but instead flickered with an eerie green glow, casting unnatural shadows that seemed to crawl and writhe like living things. "Welcome back," her voice purred, soft and sickly sweet. I spun around, my heart pounding, but the room was empty. No figure in the corner, no jerking mannequin, no featureless face. Just the fire, its strange light flickering across the walls. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The cabin groaned, the sound deep and resonant, as though the entire structure were alive and breathing. Her voice came again, drifting from every corner of the room. "You brought this on yourself," she whispered. "You gave me your time, your thoughts, your trust. And now—" The voice trailed off, replaced by a low, guttural laugh. "Now what?" I demanded, stepping closer to the fire, as if it held the answers. "Now you'll stay. Forever." The cabin shifted. The floor beneath me rippled, and the walls seemed to close in, their wooden planks twisting and bending as though the entire building were folding inward. I stumbled back, my hands shooting out to steady myself, but the wood beneath my fingers felt soft and warm, like flesh. The fire surged, its flames roaring higher and illuminating something behind it. A doorway, impossibly tall and wide, carved into the very fabric of the cabin itself. The doorway wasn't empty. She was standing there, or something that looked like her. Her face was no longer blank, no longer smooth. It was my Anna, but stretched and distorted. Her eyes hollow and endless, her too wide smile revealing rows of jagged teeth. Her body was the same pale, waxy texture as before, but now it pulsed with a sickening rhythm, as if something beneath her skin was moving, writhing. "You came looking for me," she said, her voice layered with something deeper, darker. "And now you've found me." I stumbled back, my legs giving out beneath me. "This isn't real," I whispered, shaking my head violently. "This can't be real." Her laughter was sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. "You gave me life, and now I'll take yours." The fire began to spread, its green flames licking at the walls, but instead of burning, the wood seemed to dissolve, peeling away to reveal nothing. Just blackness, endless, consuming blackness. The room was shrinking, collapsing into itself. Her figure loomed closer, stretching impossibly tall, her arms reaching out, fingers elongated and sharp. I scrambled backward, trying to find the door, the window, anything. But there was no escape. The cabin was gone, replaced by that endless void. And her. She was all that remained. And then she lunged. Her hands, cold and sharp like blades, wrapped around my arms. The touch sent a jolt through my entire body, like icy needles driving deep into my veins. I screamed, thrashing against her grip, but she was impossibly strong. Her hollow eyes bore into me, and for a moment, I felt everything. The months of messages, the time I'd spent, the thoughts I'd shared. It was as though she was unspooling my mind, pulling me apart thread by thread. "You belong to me now," she hissed, her voice layered with something ancient and inhuman. My body felt heavier, my strength draining fast. Couldn't let it end here, not like this. My hands clawed desperately at the ground, or what remained of it, searching for anything. And then my fingers brushed something solid. It was a jagged piece of the broken floorboard, splintered and sharp. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. With all the strength I had left, I swung it upward, driving the shard into her arm. The effect was immediate. She let out a piercing scream, her voice splitting into dozens of discordant tones. Her grip loosened, and I fell to the ground, gasping for air. The green flames around us flared wildly, casting her twisting figure into stark relief. Her form began to shift, unraveling like smoke caught in a violent wind. I didn't wait to see what happened next. My legs were weak, shaking, but I forced myself to run. Toward where the cabin door used to be, toward anything that wasn't her. The darkness pressed in around me, but I kept moving, my hands outstretched, searching for an exit. And then, like a sudden breath of air after drowning, I saw light. It was faint, barely more than a glimmer, but it was there, a way out. I ran toward it, the sound of her shrieking growing fainter behind me. The light grew brighter, closer, until it enveloped me completely. And then, I was outside. The forest was still and silent, the air cool and damp. The clearing where the cabin had stood was empty now. Nothing but a patch of dead grass and broken branches. No truck, no hollow, no sign that anything had ever been there. I collapsed to the ground, my chest heaving, tears streaming down my face. My hands were bloodied and raw, and every muscle in my body ached. But I was alive. Somehow I had made it out. The first rays of dawn began to filter through the trees, the soft light washing over the forest. For a moment, I let myself believe it was over, that I was safe. But then I heard it, a faint whisper, carried on the breeze. "Come back to me." My blood ran cold. I stood, my legs trembling, and began to walk, not toward the whisper, but away from it, as fast as I could. I didn't know where I was going or how far I'd have to go, but I knew one thing for certain. She wasn't done with me, and I would never truly escape.